Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video, and I'm constantly bombarded with comments asking which spec should I play, this spec or this spec, and it's an ongoing issue for a lot of people. Obviously, it is quite a commitment to go through the gearing process, learn how to play your character, and then end up possibly disappointed by its performance or its skill requirement because you didn't know that going into it. So in today's video, we're going to be resolving any possible worries that you might have in that regards towards the performance of a specialization or its required skill level. We're going to be looking at the data as well from these specializations to show which ones are most likely to deliver you a high level of success, and how the specializations have kind of rotated in terms of power week to week, even despite the fact that there were no class changes on this Friday. And AWC is of course starting on October 1st on this weekend, and we have seen in previous AWCs that they have made changes depending on if anything was too egregious during the tournament. But also note that the Midnight Alpha is coming out on October 1st, or at least this is a major Q&A to discuss it. So I don't know if their attention is just now focused on Midnight, or they're waiting for the first cup of the AWC to see what pops up there, because obviously there are some outliers on the ladder, and you want to be aware of that because maybe you've got a target on your back for potential changes. But if they are working on Midnight, like there's no changes after this AWC, you're probably good to ride it out at least until the 0.5 patch, which is like another major area where they typically have a significant amount of class changes. But let's get started. I'm going to break down the class based on its power, break it down based on its ease of play. So like how quickly are you going to start seeing results with it versus how much time is it going to take to start to master, and then start to break down the data of why I think that way with data to back it up. So Retribution Paladin, most represented at 1800 plus. This is a very easy to play, very immediate high performer. This is a specialization I recommend to anybody who's just like, I want to get into PvP, but I'm nervous about doing badly, and I just kind of want an elite set and whatever you want, some fast success. Rep Paladin is the place to go. Now, it's probably the spec with a big target on its back for changes, but if it doesn't pop up egregiously in AWC, or they're only just focused on Midnight at this point, you might just be able to ride it out and be really OP for a long time from this point. And it's definitely fun, mostly carried by the fact that it is so powerful. And this remains true throughout all the rating thresholds. You can see it. Number one, all throughout from 1800 to 2800. So if you're just starting out with it and you've got long-term goals for it, it can obviously deliver you that type of success. Next spec for melee DPS is Arms Warrior. This is another one that I do think is a little bit beginner friendly, but you have to be a bit careful with it. I would recommend the Colossus hero talent build because it can make you tankier. I think that's like one of the main drawbacks of Arms Warrior right now, is that you're actually a very good target and easy to take out. So stacking versatility and going Colossus will make you more tanky. I've personally been playing Slayer, but I've been running into a wall with Arms Warrior lately. Discipline Priest is also very much so more prevalent. We'll see that when we look at the data for the healers, and it's not a great healer for Arms Warrior, and it almost counters you because you can't stop their Void Weaver damage output too well as an Arms Warrior. So Arms Warrior, I feel like, is going to start to drop off. When we look at it from 1800 to 2100, you can see that it starts dropping off the higher and higher rated that you get, and at the top of the ladder it actually is replaced by Fury Warrior. And I think that is mostly due to the fact that it is squishier to kill. It's harder to get pressure against Discipline Priests in particular, but it can be a great kind of like newbie go-to spec. It's really fun in Battlegrounds. So this one, unlike Ret, you're probably going to struggle towards the mid and the high ratings a lot more. But at the lower ratings, you can kind of demolish, have a lot of fun at the lower ratings. So you're going for Elite set, it's obviously going to be able to easily deliver you that because we see the representation in the 1800 bracket very healthy for it. Havoc Demon Hunter is a very well-rounded specialization at the moment. I think most of the top players are playing Eldraki Reaver, but it also appears that Felskard is an option for you as well if you want to take a more passive approach towards the playstyle for it. I would say that it's like a medium to medium advanced specialization in its current iteration, though. Previous expansion, it was the easy spec. It was the one that you'd recommend to any type of newbie, but I actually think it's a lot more challenging to play now. It's got a lot more complicated rotation to set up to get meaningful damage from things like your Essence Break and your I-Beam window timings and your Inner Demon during Metamorphosis to get more damage. It has a lot more required to get the same type of performance that you'll get from Arms or Ret. So I definitely don't think it's as simple as those two. So it's kind of more moderate, advanced as far as levels of difficulty. But obviously it's going to be able to get you quite a good performance at 1800 being the number 3, number 4 at 2100, number 5 at 2400, and then jumping up to 2700, it's top 3. 2800, it's top 2. So obviously the more that you master it, it gets better at higher ratings, but some of these other melee might be better at lower ratings. Unholy DK is still holding in a very healthy position at number 4. You guys didn't get like totally rocked yet, which is surprising. Frosty K is when we get to you Sorry about that. But Unholy DK, again, I think it's kind of like a moderate difficulty, more like moderate to easy. Like Demon Hunter is a little bit harder to get real value out of your burst cooldowns. Unholy DK is going to be a bit easier since they pruned down some of that ramp. For you to get to that, but it's a little bit harder to kind of like switch targets. You're pretty locked in with your wound mechanic, which is a bit harder to exploit at lower ratings. Like being able to swap can be really potent, but its damage output is remarkably high. It's, I think, one of the main reasons it's carrying such a high representation rate. So moderate easy, moderate level difficulty. You can see at 1800 it's top 4, top 2 at 2100, top 2 at 2400, top 2 at 2700. Start to fall off a bit to top 5, but the fact that it's still even at 2800, because very few specs are obviously up this high, means that it is a really worthwhile spec. I kind of feel like it's unlikely to get nerfed, but at the same time, you know, historically DKs are just always like, boom, you get nerfed, right? But I feel like it's just in a good spot, so maybe it'll manage to dodge those nerfs. Now, Fury versus Arms, big debate. I think Fury is honestly becoming better now since the shift to the Voidweaver Discipline Priest meta on the ladder. I find as Fury Warrior, I can actually develop pressure because it's a stronger Mortal Strike effect, a little bit more single target pressure than Arms Warrior, which is why I think we see at the 2800 rating, it's more represented. I think it's a little bit harder than it's been in previous expansions, but still kind of on the easier side. Definitely like moderate to easy to moderate on the lower end. Defense for Warrior, no matter what, is going to be an issue, and getting kited. So if you want to just like play something that you're not really CC'd a lot, or it doesn't feel like it's as bad to get CC'd, don't play a Warrior. You need to fully expect that you are going to get CC'd and die a lot. But the damage output's really fun. That's the trade-off. But honestly, its damage output is probably more equivalent, maybe a little bit lesser than a lot of these other melee towards the top end. And then the negative trade-off is that mobility and defense is low. So take that into account. It's still a good go-to as far as offense, but defense is definitely limited. Assassination Rogue, really fun. Probably the most fun patch that I've played Assassination Rogue in at the moment. I'd say this one's, again, moderate to like moderate hard. Just every rogue spec in general is usually moderate hard, especially more so than previous patches, because you got to line up your Kingsbane, you got to line up your Cold Blood. I've really liked the Fatebound build with this one. It's really fun. I think its representation is honestly lower just because there's so many paladins, and paladin is a bit of a counter to you. And survival hunter is actually a lot more viable as well, and preservation evoker is a lot more viable. And these classes can remove bleeds, which is your primary mechanic of damage. But it's just really fun combos in terms of burst, and you're getting a little bit more alleviation as far as mobility compared to warrior, but in a very similar boat as far as defense. But it is a good go-to. So you want something more moderate, advanced level difficulty. You can see that it kind of holds that mid rating, but starts to climb towards the top end here at 2700, and even making it into the 2800 bracket. So definitely Assassination Rogue, solid pick if you want something from moderate level difficulty to advanced level difficulty. Survival Hunter, I think it's also moderate to advanced difficulty. I think right now Beastmaster is just delivering way more performance for ease, and honestly Marksman is too. Unfortunately, you got nerfed out of all of the hunter specs somehow. Again, like, I don't know why they want to kick the little guy and they want to kick the guy while he's down. Like, you're having a chance here and you're kind of good. You know, nope. Survival Hunter, get out of here. DKs, you guys get out of here. Enhancement Shot, I don't know what that is about. But when Rep Paladin's good like this, nah, that's good. You know what I mean? It's like one of those memes in The Office where like the attractive dude hits on the secretary and it's like, oh, this is acceptable. But then the unattractive dude hits on the secretary and no, you're getting out of here. It's like, you guys are the unattractive dude. You just, no matter what you do, you hit on somebody in the game and then they just completely remove you. But it is still viable. But I think it's a little bit more difficult to get results from. Decent durability, so we see it kind of holding into the mid, which is honestly, this is a good representation for survival, because survival is usually very low. It starts to jump a bit at 2100, actually even further at 2400, and it's actually the only hunter spec at 2700. So remarkably so, you know, I was saying Beastmaster and Marksman are seeing like the best results. Survival Hunter is the only one at 2700, so you can definitely make it work. Actually, that's because I'm not looking at ranged. If we look at ranged, yeah, okay, never mind. I was just because I was looking at melee. Survival Hunter could consider melee. The other specs are definitely up there. So Survival Hunter, just kind of a, you know, middle of the pack, is a fun specialization. Has unique mechanics. I really like the bomb animations combining with the Fury, the eagle damage. I think it's a good ride, and I don't feel like as impeded with regards to mobility with a lot of other melee, which I think is an important decision in terms of your selection for a spec. Windwalker, much like Warrior, strong damage output. A little bit better mobility, but you don't have as much lockdown. So you get to wiggle around more, but you can't hold people in position as easily as Warrior, and that's the trade-off with this one. But you are a lot more tanky. So those are the trade-offs and the drawbacks. Harder to get on somebody and kind of finish them, but you are very well-rounded, I think, despite that. And we see that all throughout here. Although they start to drop off at 2700, this is probably where like some heavy mobility range DPS are likely located. So it might be a bit of a harder time, especially when you get to the higher parts of the ladder. It's got a unique mechanic that no other melee has, which is hit combo, where you're trying not to press the same ability twice in a row, which can be fun, but also maybe potentially jarring if you've never played it before. So difficulty is probably like moderate, I would say, for Windwalker. Warrior's a little bit easier, but Windwalker holds at like a solid moderate level of difficulty to jump in. Frost Decay, I think, is easy level of difficulty to jump in. Once you learn the setups and Frost Strike hits really hard, you can absolutely crank people with your cooldown window, but it's predictable. So you'll see the representation of Frost Decay gets likely lower as we get higher rated, because it becomes just easier to counter. But even still, some Frost Decays are in 2700 bracket. So even with its predictability, you can still rise to kind of the top of the ladder with this one. It's a bit easier, but Unholy, I'd say, is overall stronger. But if you want an easier play style, Frost Decay is likely a little bit easier. They're very close, though. They're very close in terms of difficulty. Enhance, on the other hand, right now you can play a pretty easy build with Stormbringer, and it's just Ascendance. You pop it, you spam Wind Strike, and you absolutely run people over, which is making it a bit easier. But it probably has the most keybinds. Maybe Feral Druid might be competition for it. I wonder if there's a correlation between like a spec and how many keybinds it has as far as its representation here at the lower part of the ladder or something. But I'd say it's like moderate to moderate advanced level of difficulty to pick up, mostly just due to the keybinds. The fact that you have Wind Shear on a low cooldown, you need Arena 1-2-3 macros with an interrupt on that low of a cooldown to constantly shut things down. You gotta have really good game awareness. Mobility is very impeded, but its cooldown window makes it a little bit easier, and you can see that it's seeing decent success. It's actually making it into the 2800 bracket, which only, what is that, 7 of the melee DPS have actually managed to do. So it's definitely on the rise in terms of power, but it's just a bit janky, kind of easy to predict. So I think those are the main things holding it back at the moment. But maybe the best spot it's honestly been in for the whole expansion. I wish it was in the same spot it was at Dragonflight Season 1. That was my favorite version of Enhancement Shaman, but you can still definitely jump into it. Subtlety Rogue, despite being a rogue spec, I actually think Subtlety Rogue is the easiest rogue spec to play. You just macro your cooldowns together, send them in, and cheap shot, and then do your burst damage. I really found Subtlety Rogue through my playthroughs at multiple times to 2400 to not be... I would say that it's like one of the easier melees. But the problem is its power at the moment. And in solo PvP environments, people put players on stun DR and then you can't stun them. Those are the main issues. But in Battleground Blitz, Subtlety Rogue is absolutely still cranking, can be really hard carry. So I'd honestly say its difficulty is like maximum moderate, if not like a little bit less at times. But its performance is kind of holding it back. Its potential, you can see it's really dwindling in most of the brackets. Falls off completely at 2700. So debatably in Shuffle, one of the weakest, maybe the weakest spec for all melee DPS in that regard. So you're going to be hipster, you're going to be fighting against the odds here. Also likely attributed to that is the fact that Rep Paladin is so high, and it's one of the best counters to Rogue in general, especially when it's this strong. Feral Druid, competing with enhancements for some of the most keybinds and very complex rotation. I'd say that this one is the advanced class. Like both Outlaw and Feral are the advanced of melee. So this is something you're jumping into long-term goals of expecting that it's going to be a bit difficult at the start. But after you've invested your time, then you're going to really get a lot of performance out of it because you're balancing both very complicated damage rotation as well as some of the best utility in the game while trying not to instantly explode to all the burst damage. So taking all of those variables into account makes it very challenging. And it looks like it holds out. Oh, it's actually loading at the moment. I'm hoping the website doesn't crash on me at this point in time, because that would be very disappointing if it crashed on me at this time. But Feral Druid's representation is likely holding out more so towards the bottom end, I would think, for most of this. I'm just going to refresh the page and then pray to God that we're able to get this back in line. It looks like we're going to be able to. So Feral Druid holds out, bottom three. It does squeeze into 2700 though. So you can make it work. I think its main issue is just survivability against some of the high burst damage at the moment. If they do make any changes to that, though, Feral could easily just jump up straight to the top. So do note that if you want to invest in it. Outlaw Rogue, again, one of the more advanced rotationally, figuring out your roll to bones buffs. You can download some add-ons to try and make that a bit easier, but generally I would say that it's very challenging melee DPS to play and get the maximum performance out of. But I think it's a lot better than I had initially expected. Definitely think Subtlety Rogue is significantly worse, at least at Shuffle. If we look at Battleground Blitz, I'd probably switch that around. Its representation is towards the bottom until we get to like 2700. And then it's still in the, it's still able to hold on to 2700 in that position, but you got to be really dedicated to this guy if you want to be riding this one out as far as melee DPS. And that's the breakdown for melee. Let's jump into range DPS because it'd be the same thing here. Boomkin, number 1 representation at 1800. I think that it's pretty close all throughout, honestly. It starts to fall off at 27 and 2800. We do see like an interesting meta shift, honestly, at the top of the ladder with classes. But Boomkin right now, I actually don't think is very challenging. I think it's very tanky with the stamina buffs for our bear form. Our burst window is very easy to perform. Just Trent's Incarn spam Star Surge, and you've got, there you go, Bear Form Frenzy Regen, Incarn Star Surge spam. I think it's actually very new player friendly at the moment. With the haste thresholds as high as they are, it's a lot easier to fake cyclones and deal with interrupts. So I would say that it's kind of more so on like the easy to moderate level of difficulty to pick up out of the box. Definitely a good one to go for. Beast Mastery Hunter, remarkably easy to play. Definitely the easiest range DPS to play at the moment. Almost all of your damage coming from pets and procs and bleeds from your pets. So you can play pretty passively while your pets just absolutely farm the other team. And its representation remains very high until we get to about 27 and 28, where it seems like casters just completely dominate. Now, I think this is a little bit of EU influence because I am looking at EU and NA. Which does have some importance towards representation and respect. But again, for melee, I'd recommend Ret Paladin for anybody who just wants some quick results. Beastmaster is kind of the case for ranged. And then Marksman would be the second one. The changes to where now Explosive Shot give you instant aim shots and volleys give you resets and instant aim shots. It's just like a ton of instant 5 million to 10 million crits that you can lob out on Marksman. It's really just strong damage. That's for the most part unpreventable. Mostly also just because rogues aren't as prevalent, which was like a main counter to you. And you can see that it's good all throughout the ladder, ignoring the fact that when we get to 28 plus, which is a very limited exclusive club at the moment, especially with MMR inflating the way that it is. But it's a really good to go to. Shadow Priest, I'd say, is moderate advanced. Maybe advanced even in some sense. I think the one thing that makes it a bit easier to play is it's really tanky. But getting maximum performance out of it, I think, can be challenging, especially when you're getting trained by multiple melee. But its defense is very high. You're probably the hardest spec in the game to kill. So if you like immortality, this is a good go-to. But as far as managing utility and effectiveness in the game, I'd say it's moderate to advanced as far as difficulty. And you're going to have a decent ride with this one almost all the way throughout, right? Even making it into the 2800 bracket for range DPS. So a solid pick. Also, I think it's unlikely to get nerfed. And I'm honestly thinking that we might even see this as the sleeper spec of the tournament that everybody's just not considering whatsoever. Destruction Warlock, I had a ton of fun playing this. I think it's really simple and easy to play at the moment. Where am I going with this one? Destruction Warlock is really good. Problems I've had is shuffle, multiple melee. I'm still under geared. I think once I get the full gear and I can iron out some situations, I think it'll become better. Although you will be the focus and attention of pretty much everyone in the game. So if you don't like being the center of attention, might want to avoid this one. But if you like just absolutely cranking Chaos Bolts, this is a good pick. I don't know if it'll get nerfed just because of its damage threshold. They are very sensitive to abilities that hit a little bit too hard. They're very sensitive to nerfing those things, I've noticed throughout the years on changes when it comes to PvP. So it could receive nerfs there, but I think Destro, like we saw, it's riding right through the middle and at the top level even at 2800 plus. So I do think it's a sleeper spec, likely a lot more viable than people are giving it credit. Elemental Shaman, another one I think that's doing a bit better. It's recovering after its initial start, like just completely at the bottom of representation for Elemental Shaman. I think Ellie has got a lot of keybinds, but its rotation is pretty simple. Just Flame Shock and Lava Burst procs. It does start to fall off more and more as we get to the top of the ladder, likely due to its lack of finishing power. It's probably having a harder time ending games, but if you can survive deeper into dampening, it's definitely going to have a better ride. It's got a lot of mobility disruption, but a lot of keybinds. So take that into account. I think the keybind density raises its difficulty. Rotation easy, keybind density high, similar to the current Enhanced Shaman build. Now, Arcane Mage, I think, is the most difficult range DPS to play, so I'd put it immediately on Advanced. But even despite that, it's the highest represented even at the lower parts of the ladder, which means it's still very potent of a class despite all the changes to it. And, they brought down its Arcane Barrage damage quite significantly, and it holds its position throughout the middle rankings and even upper rankings as we get into 2800. So if you're willing to take on that level of initial difficulty, Arcane Mage will be able to deliver you a lot of results. Demonology Warlock, I'd say, is moderate to moderate advanced level of difficulty. Again, having pets do most of your damage is nice, but you got a little bit more micromanagement than Beast Mastery does. You don't have a lot of the benefits that Beast Mastery has for avoiding certain crowd control effects and things like that. So it's and a little bit easier to see damage coming from a Demonology Warlock during its Tyrant window, whereas Beastmastery is like this little Fenrir wolf hidden inside of other 10 New York City zoo pets, running at you with a bleed that's randomly destroying you. But I think it is a solid option to pick, just holding throughout the mid. Probably very unlikely to see nerfs, and it's even in the 2800 bracket. So it's likely a really safe pick, and solid viability even at the moment, despite any changes happening or not happening. Fire Mage is definitely on the rise, but I will say it's the most volatile range DPS. I think you're very squishy, and you have to play very defensive with your mobility, but you crank out a ton of damage. You have a massive window of burst with Sun Fury, which I've been enjoying a lot. So if you want that kind of volatile experience, I would definitely recommend it. You can see it's rising through the ranks, taking the #1 spot at the highest point in the ladder as well. So definitely a lot of potential and possibilities with this and playmaking opportunities. I'd say that almost all the Mage specs are kind of moderate to moderate advanced. I think due to its level of defense, that it's a bit harder to play. But once you've mastered its mobility, usage of alter time and barriers, you're going to get a lot of value out of it. Affliction Warlock, I think, is starting to struggle. It's just hard to keep up with all the burst damage. There's a lot of disruption, a lot of interrupts. You're not lobbing out the 9 million chaos bolts like the Destruction Warlocks are. And I just want to see how it looks as we like climb the ranks. Is that true all the way throughout? It seems like it does start to fall off. Some still at 2700 plus, but at 2800 starts to fall off. A little bit of a rougher ride, I would say, in the current meta. But it still has opportunities, right? This is like a much more solid representation of range as opposed to melee, where we saw it like really spiked at the top and then falling down to nothing. You can still definitely make it work. This may be one of the specs that's more likely to get a buff, maybe, if there were any specs to get a buff. Devastation Evoker. Oh, wait, I take it back from Beastmaster. Dev Evoker is the best spec to play if you want simple, easy, and fast results. Oh my god, this spec is the most underrated spec. I think people just don't pick it because of class fantasy or something, because you just crank damage. It just absolutely melts people. I've seen people consistently getting like 4 to 5 million DPS openers. Easily just absolutely melts at the lower level of the ladder to the mid level of the ladder. I think it's like one of the most underrated. You can see that all throughout the different rating brackets. I swear it's just the most underrated spec in the game. Would definitely recommend it if you're trying to just log on something for a couple of hours a week and see results. Frost Mage, I think its main advantage over the other two is that it's tankier. It's way tankier, has a lot more utility and snares. I think it does the best into Beast Mastery Hunters, which Fire, I think, struggles a lot. But Frost doesn't as much. Also, the combustion into Roar of Sack. Fire, I'm surprised Fire is honestly doing as well as it is, because I feel like Hunter is almost like a soft counter to it. But I think Frost is increasing in its viability. I personally played the instant cast build all the way to 2400, mostly because locking yourself into the Glacial Spike build, I feel like you're just too easily stopped, especially as you get higher and higher rated and if you're getting trained down by hunters. So I much prefer the instant build. The instant build's way easier to play. I'd say Frost in general is like the easiest mage spec. Just Flurry, Lance, Lance, Flurry, Lance, Lance, and you've basically got like 80% of your effectiveness as far as doing damage in most cases. And then Augmentation Evoker is also underrated. I think Aug is actually a solid competitive spec, but it's kind of just seen as like this weird abomination, right? It's like this, it was the support thing and now it's a DPS, I guess. It's kind of getting gerrymandered into there, but definitely underrated as far as viability. And it holds that bottom spot all throughout, basically, and not even getting into the 2700 or 2800 bracket. But most of the ranged, great viable options. Some of them possibly some targets on their back for nerfs, but most of the guys in here, I'd say it's like less likely. When we look at healers, I think healer balance is where we've seen the biggest shift as far as like viability. Before, healers were really balanced, and I could say like you pretty much go for anything. I think it's becoming a little bit less and less. You said with Disc Priest, right? Void Weaver Disc Priest is starting to take over, although Resto Shaman still competes. When we flip to the top of the ladder, it's still Disc at the ultimate pinnacle of it, but Prez Evoker has like an inverse effect. The higher rated you get on it, the more results you get with it. But Disc with Void Reaver is just really good. It's just cranking out massive numbers. You basically do as much DPS as DPS, which is probably drawing some red flags and alerts, especially if it pops up in the tournament at all. Although some people are saying that they don't think it will because it's too easy to stop. But if it does and you're out DPSing a hunter, I would probably think that's where they're going to more likely make some type of change or nerf. Resto Shaman, very tough to play as far as keybind density. So I will say that about Resto Shaman and Disc Priest as well. I feel like these are kind of more like moderate to advanced level healers as far as keybind density, rotation management, dealing with pressure when getting attacked, but Disc is a little overtuned, which makes it a bit easier to play there. But Resto Shaman's a great pick as far as viability. Holy Paladin's just decent. He's just there, you know. He's good old reliable. I think you can have some mana issues against these healers, which is definitely a bit of a problem for Holy Paladin at the moment. And you can be a target in most cases, but the ultimate high rating of the ladder, it seems like Paladin falls off quite heavily. But towards the entry level, mid level position, I'd say this is like one of the easiest healers to play straightforward out of the box, because just Holy Shock instant heals, Eternal Flame are instant heals. Avenging Wrath makes your healing just god mode. You got a lot of immunities. I think those generally make a healer easier as a beginner, so that's why I'd recommend Holy Paladin or Holy Priest, because they're just more straightforward instant healing with a lot of immunity periods, so you can deal with those scary like 20-second windows where a lot of healers, if you're new to healing in the role, you might just panic and fall over. You got cooldowns that can get you through those a lot more effectively. And that's why Mistweaver or Holy Priest and Holy Paladin would be my recommendations for beginners. Disc and Resto for moderate to advanced. Mistweaver, I don't really know if I can recommend at all. It's still holding like some decent numbers throughout all of the rankings here, but it just seems like it doesn't have an identity of build anymore since they nerfed the Wind Kick build and they've removed the Vivification build. It's struggling to find its identity, and I think it's very easily controlled. So this is kind of like a niche pick where you just like Monk, honestly, from my perspective. I think it can be considered to be a bit easier of a healer. Main difficulty is using your portal to avoid crowd control. That's the main tool you're going to want to focus on. Otherwise, you're just going to be a training dummy for CC. Preservation Evoker, I actually want to say, is the hardest healer to play. I think balancing echo usage to duplicate your spells and making sure you're doing damage while also staying in range, and I think it's got a lot going on. I'd say that's probably why its representation is lower at the lower level of the ladder. But when we get to the highest part of the ladder, we're going to have to refresh this here really quick. When we get to the highest point of the ladder, hopefully it's going to refresh here, but we're pretty much through this anyways if it doesn't manage to do it for us here. But Preservation is a really good pick for someone much like Feral, right? Once you've invested, you've mastered it, you can get a lot of value out of it. And it's a really good pick. Resto Druid, on the other hand, I think is just the weakest healer across the board. Throughput is a struggle. The loss of the set bonus, I think actually the rest of top rated Resto Druids right now are playing the set bonus from last season. I don't know if you can still get that anymore. But Resto Druid is, I think, falling off quite heavily. Would not be my major recommendation. I think it's a lot harder to play rotationally, maintaining hots on all the targets, and due to its performance. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But that's the breakdown of all the classes, all the roles, level of difficulty, expected performance, anticipation of changes. Resto Druid is probably the most likely to get buffed, though. So, and Mistweaver maybe most likely to get buffed, so maybe that will change in the future. And as always, I'm relaying that information to you guys here on the channel, doing my best to keep you guys up to date in the know and the now, so you're ahead of the competition. So make sure to smash the subscribe button. Thank you guys very much for the support, and I will see you on the next one.